January 17th, 1991, 3 o'clock in the morning. Iraqi airspace west of Baghdad. Captain Mike Dozer Roberts flies his F-4G Wild Weasel at 20,000 feet, heading northeast toward the Iraqi capital, where coalition strike packages are beginning the air campaign that will become Operation Desert Storm. Roberts occupies the front seat, flying the aircraft and managing weapons. In the rear seat, Captain Greg Beardslee operates the sophisticated electronic warfare systems that make the Wild Weasel mission possible. Their aircraft bristles with antennas, 52 separate antenna systems covering the F-4G's fuselage and wings, each designed to detect specific frequency ranges across the electromagnetic spectrum. The AN/APR-38 radar warning receiver displays multiple screens in both cockpits, showing detected radar emissions as symbols positioned relative to the aircraft's heading. Bear's displays are alive with contacts. Iraqi early warning radars sweeping the airspace, acquisition radars searching for targets, fire control radars tracking specific aircraft. Each radar appears on his display with a specific symbol indicating the type of threat it represents, and a priority level indicating how dangerous it is to their aircraft at current range and position. At 82 miles from Baghdad, a new symbol appears on Bear's display. A Soviet SA-6 Gainful fire control radar has activated, its characteristic frequency and pulse repetition rate immediately identified by the APR-38's threat library. The SA-6 is one of Iraq's most capable air defense systems, a mobile tracked vehicle carrying 3 surface-to-air missiles guided by a sophisticated radar capable of engaging aircraft at ranges up to 30 kilometers. This particular system has activated its straight flush fire control radar, indicating it's tracking targets and preparing to launch missiles at coalition aircraft. Bear immediately calls the contact. SA-6, 11 o'clock, 82 miles tracking. Roberts checks his own display, confirms the threat, and makes an instant tactical decision. The SA-6 is threatening coalition strike aircraft that are proceeding toward their targets in the Baghdad area. Wild Weasel doctrine is clear. Neutralize radar-guided threats before they can engage the strike package. Roberts calls Magnum, the brevity code word that tells everyone on the tactical frequency that a Wild Weasel has launched an anti-radiation missile, and presses the weapon release button on his control stick. An AGM-88 HARM, high-speed anti-radiation missile, drops from the centerline weapon station under Roberts' F-4G. The missile's rocket motor ignites, accelerating the weapon to Mach 3 as it begins tracking toward the SA-6's radar emissions. The HARM carries a sophisticated seeker head in its nose that detects electromagnetic radiation across a wide frequency band, homing on radar signals like a bloodhound following a scent. The missile doesn't need continuous guidance from the launching aircraft. Once it locks onto a radar signal, it guides itself to the source. Roberts maintains his heading briefly to ensure the HARM achieves good track, then breaks away to continue searching for additional threats. The HARM flight time from launch to impact at 82 miles is approximately 27 seconds at Mach 3. Iraqi radar operators at the SA-6 site detect the inbound missile through their radar warning systems, Soviet-designed equipment that alerts them when Western anti-radiation missiles are tracking their emissions. They face an impossible tactical choice: shut down their radar immediately and lose tracking on coalition aircraft they're supposed to engage, or maintain radar operation, and accept that a HARM missile is homing directly toward their antenna. The Iraqi crew chooses survival. They shut down the straight flush radar and begin abandoning their positions, running from the tracked vehicle as the HARM approaches. But the AGM-88 incorporates a memory mode specifically designed for this scenario. When the target radar shuts down, the missile continues toward the last known emission point, relying on inertial navigation to maintain course toward where the radar was located when it stopped transmitting. The HARM impacts near the SA-6's radar antenna with its 66-kilogram blast fragmentation warhead, damaging the antenna and associated equipment sufficiently to render the system inoperative. Roberts receives confirmation from Bear that the SA-6 emission has ceased, and he calls over tactical frequency, "Radar down, strikers proceed." Coalition strike aircraft continue toward their targets, knowing that particular air defense threat has been neutralized. This engagement, one of hundreds that will occur during Desert Storm's opening days, demonstrates the tactical revolution that Wild Weasel aircraft created in the competition between offensive air power and defensive surface-to-air missile systems. To understand why Soviet air defense planners were unprepared for Wild Weasel capability, you need to understand what they'd built and what assumptions guided their doctrine. The Soviet Union invested enormous resources throughout the 1960s, 1970s, and 1980s in developing comprehensive ground-based air defense networks. The SA-2 guideline, entering service in 1957, provided the foundation, a radar-guided surface-to-air missile system capable of engaging aircraft at medium to high altitudes, with ranges approaching 40 kilometers. The SA-3 GOA followed in 1961, designed for low to medium altitude engagements that complemented SA-2's high altitude capability, The SA-6 Gainful, operational from 1970, added mobile capability with sophisticated radar that could track multiple targets simultaneously while guiding missiles to intercept. These systems, integrated with early warning radars and command networks, created layered defenses that Soviet doctrine assumed would make offensive air operations extremely costly for any attacking force. Soviet air defense philosophy held that ground-based radars provided fundamental advantage over attacking aircraft. Radars could detect aircraft at long ranges, track them continuously, and guide missiles to intercept without requiring the radar operators to visually acquire targets or maneuver defensively. Attacking aircraft, according to Soviet assumptions, would need to locate SAM sites visually, a difficult task when sites were camouflaged and mobile, and approach within weapon range to engage them with bombs or rockets. This approach exposed attacking aircraft to the SAM's own defenses, creating tactical situations that favored defenders. Soviet planners recognized that attackers could potentially neutralize individual SAM sites through overwhelming attacks, but Soviet doctrine assumed such attacks would be costly enough to make comprehensive suppression of air defenses impractical. The attacker would need to accept substantial losses to neutralize enough defenses to allow follow-on strikes to proceed safely. The Vietnam War provided initial validation of Soviet air defense doctrine. North Vietnamese forces, equipped with Soviet SA-2 systems and trained by Soviet advisors, achieved significant success engaging American strike aircraft throughout the war. Between 1965 and 1968, SA-2 missiles engaged numerous American aircraft, forcing changes in American tactics and causing losses that impacted operational planning. American strike packages attempting to engage SAM sites faced tactical challenges that Soviet doctrine predicted. Locating mobile sites was difficult. Approaching within bombing range exposed aircraft to SAM engagement, and the SA-2's long range allowed it to engage American aircraft before they could effectively engage the missile sites themselves. American commanders recognized that SA-2 sites forced their aircraft to fly at low altitudes to avoid radar coverage or conduct extensive maneuvering to evade missiles, both of which reduced strike effectiveness and increased losses to anti-aircraft artillery. What Soviet planners never anticipated was the American response, developing specialized aircraft specifically designed to exploit radar emissions as targeting information rather than requiring visual acquisition of SAM sites. This fundamental tactical inversion, turning Soviet radar's strength into vulnerability, created capabilities that Soviet doctrine had no framework for addressing. The Wild Weasel program originated from urgent operational necessity during the Vietnam War. In 1965, as North Vietnamese SA-2 systems began neutralizing American strike aircraft with increasing effectiveness, the United States Air Force initiated a rapid development effort to create specialized radar hunting capability. The first Wild Weasel variant, designated F-100F, entered combat operations in 1966. These aircraft carried primitive radar warning receivers and AGM-45 Shrike anti-radiation missiles, providing limited capability to detect SAM radars and engage them with guided weapons. The concept proved sound. Aircraft specifically equipped and trained for radar hunting could significantly reduce SAM effectiveness, but the early systems were limited by immature technology and insufficient range. The F-105G Thunderchief, serving as Wild Weasel III from 1967 through 1984, represented substantial improvement. The aircraft carried more sophisticated radar warning receivers, better displays for crew situation awareness, and the longer-range AGM-78 Standard Arm anti-radiation missile. F-105G crews flew more than 12,000 sorties during the Vietnam War, neutralizing more than 200 North Vietnamese SA-2 sites, while suffering 63 aircraft losses. The loss rate was substantial, but significantly lower than strike aircraft flying without Wild Weasel support would have experienced. Analysis after the war concluded that Wild Weasel presence reduced strike package losses by factors of 3 to 5, meaning missions with Wild Weasel support lost 1 aircraft, where similar missions without that support would have lost 3 to 5. The tactical value was clear, but the Wild Weasel III capabilities remained limited by 1960s-era electronics and relatively primitive anti-radiation missiles. The F-4G Wild Weasel Phi, developed between 1975 and 1978, represented a quantum leap in capability built on lessons learned from Vietnam operations. Rather than designing a new aircraft, the Air Force converted F-4E Phantom fighters to the Wild Weasel role, removing the internal gun and replacing it with sophisticated electronic warfare equipment. The resulting F-4G incorporated 52 antenna systems positioned across the aircraft's fuselage, wings, and tail, providing comprehensive coverage of the electromagnetic spectrum from very low frequencies through radar bands into electronic warfare frequencies. These antennas fed the AN/APR-38 radar warning receiver, a computer-based system that could detect, identify, and locate multiple radar threats simultaneously. The APR-38's capabilities exceeded anything previous Wild Weasel variants had carried. The system maintained a comprehensive threat library containing the electromagnetic signatures of every Soviet radar system: SA-2, SA-3, SA-6, SA-8, SA-10, ZSU-23-4, anti-aircraft artillery fire, control radars, early warning radars, acquisition radars, and others. When the APR-38's antennas detected radar emissions, the system compared those emissions to its threat library and immediately identified the specific radar model. The system then used multiple antennas to triangulate the radar's location, calculating precise range and bearing from the F-4G's current position. All this information displayed on screens in both the front and rear cockpits, showing detected threats as symbols positioned around a compass, rows indicating their direction relative to the aircraft is heading. The threats were prioritized by danger level. Radars actively tracking the F-4G appeared in one color, radars searching but not yet tracking appeared in another, radars that were detected but currently pointing away appeared in a third. This comprehensive situational awareness allowed Wild Weasel crews to understand the entire air defense picture around them and prioritize which threats needed immediate attention. The AN-APR-47 system complemented the APR-38 by recording detailed parameters of detected radar emissions for post-mission intelligence analysis. When Wild Weasel crews encountered new radar systems or variants of known systems, the APR-47 captured frequency, pulse repetition rate, scanning patterns, and other characteristics that intelligence analysts could study to update threat libraries and develop countermeasures. This capability ensured American understanding of Soviet radar technology remained current even as new systems deployed. The weapons evolution that accompanied improved detection systems proved equally important. The AGM-45 Shrike, the first American anti-radiation missile to see widespread use during the 1960s, offered 16-kilometer range and relatively simple homing logic. If the target radar shut down after missile launch, the Shrike lost guidance and typically missed. This limitation allowed experienced SAM crews to defeat Shrike attacks through tactical procedures, detecting the incoming missile, shutting down radar briefly, allowing the missile to pass, then reactivating to continue engaging aircraft. The AGM-88 Standard Arm, introduced in 1968, extended range to 90 kilometers and added memory capability that allowed the missile to continue toward the target's last known position even after radar shutdown. This improvement forced SAM crews to remain shut down longer or relocate their equipment after each radar activation, significantly reducing their operational effectiveness. The AGM-88 HARM, entering service in 1983, revolutionized anti-radiation warfare. The missile flew at Mach 3, approximately 3,700 kilometers per hour, covering 100 kilometers in less than 2 minutes. The seeker had incorporated sophisticated processing that could home on radar emissions across wide frequency bands, making it effective against all Soviet radar types. Most importantly, HARM offered multiple targeting modes that adapted to different tactical situations. Target of Opportunity Mode allowed Wild Weasel crews to fire at radars as they detected them, with the missile autonomously guiding to the strongest radar signal in its field of view. Pre-briefed mode allowed crews to program the missile with coordinates of known SAM sites from intelligence reports, firing the HARM toward those coordinates, where it would activate its seeker to find radars operating in the target area. Self-protect mode provided automatic response to radars that actively tracked the launching aircraft, firing HARMs immediately when the APR-38 detected tracking radars above defined threat levels. The memory mode that had proven so valuable in AGM-78 was refined further, allowing HARM to remember radar positions with greater accuracy and continue to those coordinates even when radars shut down. The tactics that Wild Weasel crews employed capitalized on these technological capabilities. A typical mission during Desert Storm involved Wild Weasel aircraft flying ahead of strike packages, the first-in role that gave the Wild Weasel community its motto, first in, last out. The Wild Weasels would penetrate hostile airspace before strike aircraft, flying routes designed to provoke Iraqi air defenses into activating their radars. Iraqi radar operators monitoring approaching aircraft would activate their systems to acquire targets and prepare missile launches. The moment those radars activated, Wild Weasel APR-38 systems detected the emissions, identified the radar types, calculated their positions, and prioritized threats. Wild Weasel crews would then fire HARMs at the highest priority threats, typically fire control radars actively guiding missiles or about to launch. Iraqi crews faced impossible choices: maintain radar operation and accept HARM engagement within 30 seconds, or shut down and surrender the ability to engage coalition aircraft. Either choice benefited coalition operations. If Iraqi radars stayed active, HARMs would neutralize them. If they shut down to avoid HARMs, they couldn't engage strike aircraft that were proceeding to their targets. The two-seat crew configuration was essential to Wild Weasel effectiveness. The pilot in the front seat flew the aircraft, managed formation position, monitored threats, and employed weapons. The electronic warfare officer in the rear seat, universally known as the Bear in Wild Weasel tradition, operated the AN/APR-38 and AN/APR-47 systems, analyzed, detected threats, provided continuous verbal updates to the pilot about the tactical situation, and managed defensive systems when Iraqi fighters or SAMs engaged the aircraft. The partnership between pilot and Bear required extensive training to develop the mutual trust and coordination necessary for success in one of the most dangerous roles in tactical aviation. Wild Weasel crews deliberately provoked enemy air defenses to shoot at them, flying into heavily defended areas where multiple SAM systems and anti-aircraft artillery concentrated their fires. The crew needed to trust each other implicitly. The pilot trusted the Bear to identify threats accurately and provide timely warnings. The Bear trusted the pilot to maneuver effectively and employ weapons at the right moments. Combat operations during the Vietnam War established Wild Weasel tactics and proved the concept's viability under the most demanding conditions. F-105G Wild Weasel III crews flying from bases in Thailand conducted missions along routes into North Vietnam that became legendary for their danger. Thud Ridge, named for the F-105, Thunder Chief's nickname, marked the approach corridor where SA-2 sites waited to engage American aircraft. Wild Weasel crews would lead strike packages along these routes, detecting SA-2 radars as they activated to track the formation. When Fansong fire control radars, the distinctive Soviet system that guided SA-2 missiles, began tracking, Wild Weasel crews would fire AGM-88 standard arms, forcing the sites to shut down or be engaged. This suppression of radar coverage allowed strike aircraft following behind to proceed toward their targets with reduced SAM threat, though the tactic never eliminated danger entirely. SA-2 operators learned to activate their radars only briefly, launching missiles quickly then shutting down before AGM-78s could arrive. The cat-and-mouse game between Wild Weasel crews and North Vietnamese SAM operators continued throughout the war, with both sides adapting tactics to counter the other's innovations. The statistics from Vietnam operations illustrated Wild Weasel impact. The 63 F-105G losses during more than 12,000 sorties represented an attrition rate of approximately 0.5% per sortie, high by modern standards, but substantially better than strike aircraft flying without Wild Weasel support. More importantly, the Wild Weasel presence forced North Vietnamese SAM operators to adopt defensive postures that reduced their effectiveness against strike packages. Analysis comparing missions with and without Wild Weasel support showed consistent patterns. Strike packages with Wild Weasels experienced fewer SAM launches, lower SAM success rates when launches occurred, and significantly reduced overall losses. The 200-plus SA-2 sites that Wild Weasel crews neutralized represented substantial degradation of North Vietnamese air defenses that would have been impossible without specialized radar hunting capability. Operation Desert Storm in 1991 provided the definitive demonstration of what mature Wild Weasel capability could achieve against a comprehensive Soviet-designed air defense network. Iraq possessed one of the world's most extensive integrated air defense systems outside the Soviet Union, with more than 700 surface-to-air missile launchers, including SA-2, SA-3, SA-6, SA-8, and more modern systems, plus thousands of anti-aircraft artillery pieces, and an extensive radar network. The United States Air Force deployed 48 F-4G Wild Weasels to the theater, positioning them at bases in Saudi Arabia and other coalition locations over the 43-day air campaign. These aircraft flew more than 4,500 sorties and fired more than 2,000 HARM missiles, systematically neutralizing Iraqi radar-guided air defenses to the point where coalition aircraft operated with near impunity. The opening night of Desert Storm on January 17, 1991, showcased Wild Weasel tactical value. F-4Gs preceded F-117 Nighthawk stealth fighters into Iraqi airspace, engaging radar sites that could potentially detect even the stealthy aircraft through gaps in their low observable coverage. Wild Weasel crews fired HARMs at Iraqi early warning radars, acquisition radars, and fire control radars, forcing them to shut down or be neutralized. This created corridors through Iraqi air defenses where F-117s could penetrate toward their targets in Baghdad with minimized detection risk. Once strike aircraft began hitting targets throughout Iraq, Wild Weasels maintained continuous presence over key areas, immediately engaging any Iraqi radar that activated. The Iraqi response during the campaign's first hours followed Soviet doctrine. Activate radars to detect and engage coalition aircraft, guide SAMs to intercept, employ layered defenses to create interlocking coverage that attackers couldn't easily penetrate. By the end of day one, Iraqi air defense commanders recognized their doctrine was failing catastrophically. Every radar activation brought HARM missiles within 30 seconds, so fast that crews barely had time to shut down and abandon positions before impacts occurred. Iraqi SAM crews reported that American aircraft appeared designed specifically to hunt their radars, that the tactical advantages Soviet doctrine promised were inverted, that operating radars was suicidal rather than protective, Iraqi air defense leadership issued new directives implementing what became known as lights out doctrine. SAM sites should activate radars for only seconds at a time, attempt quick engagements, then shut down immediately to avoid harm attacks. This doctrine preserved equipment and crews, but surrendered the persistent radar coverage that effective air defense required. Wild Weasel crews countered by using HARM's pre-briefed mode, programming missiles with coordinates from intelligence reports of known SAM positions and firing toward those locations. When Iraqi radars briefly activated, HARMs already in flight would acquire the emissions and guide to engagement. The effectiveness of Wild Weasel operations during Desert Storm exceeded even optimistic pre-war predictions. By the end of the first week, Iraqi air defenses were neutralized by more than 70%. Most sites had been engaged by HARMs or had abandoned their positions to avoid engagement. SAM engagement opportunities against coalition aircraft dropped by more than 90% as Iraqi crews learned that radar activation meant near certain harm attack. Coalition aircraft losses to SAMs became rare events rather than expected occurrences. Post-war interviews with captured Iraqi air defense personnel revealed consistent testimony. They had been trained in Soviet doctrine emphasizing the superiority of ground-based air defense. They operated capable equipment when they were allowed to use it. But American Wild Weasel capability made it impossible to employ their systems effectively. Multiple Iraqi SAM crew members stated they never fired their missiles during the entire war because activating radars was too dangerous. Iraqi air defense had been effectively neutralized, not through destroying every SAM launcher, but through making it tactically impossible for them to operate. The F-4G flew its final combat mission during Desert Storm in March 1991, marking the end of an era for the Wild Weasel platform that had served for more than a decade. The aircraft was already scheduled for retirement, with the F-16CJ Fighting Falcon designated to assume the Wild Weasel role using external pods rather than integrated systems. But the F-4G's legacy was firmly established through Vietnam and Desert Storm operations that proved specialized radar hunting capability could decisively shift tactical balance between offensive air power and defensive SAM systems. Soviet air defense planners' inability to counter Wild Weasel reflected fundamental assumptions about air warfare that American innovation invalidated. Soviet doctrine assumed attacking aircraft needed visual acquisition of ground targets to engage them effectively. Wild Weasel inverted this assumption by using radar emissions, which Soviet doctrine relied upon for air defense effectiveness, as targeting information that required no visual acquisition. Soviet radars designed to detect aircraft at long range to provide engagement advantage, instead revealed SAM positions to Wild Weasel sensors at even longer ranges, allowing harm engagements before SAMs could effectively respond. Soviet attempts at countermeasures faced inherent limitations. Shutting down radars to avoid harm attacks prevented engagement, but also prevented SAM sites from performing their mission of engaging coalition aircraft. Iraqi crews were caught in a tactical dilemma with no good solution: operate radars and accept harm engagement, or shut down radars and surrender air defense capability. Soviet engineers developed radar emission reduction techniques and attempted decoy emitter systems that would draw harms away from actual radars. But these countermeasures proved insufficient against HARMA's sophisticated homing algorithms that could distinguish between genuine radars and decoys through signal analysis. Soviet and later Russian forces never developed dedicated radar hunting capability equivalent to Wild Weasel. Attempts with platforms like the Su-25TK and MiG-25BM provided limited anti-radiation capability, but these aircraft operated with sensors and weapons substantially inferior to F-4G systems. The fundamental problem was that Wild Weasel represented not just a platform, but an entire tactical and technological system. Specialized sensors, dedicated weapons, trained crews, and doctrine optimized for the radar hunting mission. Replicating this system required investment and technological capability that Soviet and Russian aerospace industries struggled to provide. The result was that Western forces maintained decisive advantages in suppression of enemy air defenses throughout the post-Cold War period, advantages that shaped every air campaign from the 1990s through the present. The legacy of Wild Weasel operations extends far beyond the F-4G platform to establish CAD, suppression of enemy air defenses, as a critical mission that every air campaign must address. Modern American and NATO air operations begin with CAD missions designed to neutralize radar-guided threats before strike aircraft proceed to their targets. The F-16CJ that replaced F-4G continues the Wild Weasel mission today, carrying external pods with radar warning receivers and HARMs that provide capability similar to what F-4G offered, though in a more maintainable and upgradable package. The AGM-88 HARM, Advanced Anti-Radiation Guided Missile, adds GPS guidance and millimeter wave radar that allow the weapon to engage targets even when radars are shut down, using coordinates from pre-mission intelligence or other sources. Modern air defense systems acknowledge Wild Weasel threat through their design characteristics. Russian S-400 and S-500 systems incorporate frequency hopping radars that change frequencies rapidly to complicate harm homing, and they emphasize minimizing radar emission time through quick scan modes that reduce exposure to detection. Chinese HQ-9 SAM systems explicitly address anti-radiation threat through design features intended to limit electromagnetic emissions and reduce vulnerability to Western CD tactics. These defensive responses to Wild Weasel capability confirm that radar hunting remains effective more than 50 years after the concept first proved viable over North Vietnam. The Wild Weasel community within the Air Force developed distinctive culture around their dangerous mission. The motto, "First in, last out," reflects tactical reality. Wild Weasels enter hostile airspace before strike packages to suppress air defenses and remain on station until all friendly aircraft clear the area. The mission requires special mindset because Wild Weasel crews deliberately provoke enemy air defenses to shoot at them, flying into the most heavily defended areas where SAMs concentrate, and accepting risks that other crews avoid when possible. Wild Weasel pilots and electronic warfare officers who flew combat missions during Vietnam and Desert Storm universally described the intensity of deliberately antagonizing air defense networks while maintaining situational awareness of multiple threats simultaneously. The professional respect between Wild Weasel crews and the SAM operators they engaged reflects acknowledgement that both sides were professionals executing their missions under extremely dangerous conditions. When Captain Roberts launched that harm at the Iraqi SA-6 site west of Baghdad on January 17, 1991, he was executing tactics developed over 25 years of Wild Weasel evolution. Soviet air defense planners who designed the SA-6 system assumed its radar would detect attacking aircraft first, providing advantage in any engagement. They never anticipated aircraft specifically designed to exploit that radar as targeting information, to engage from ranges beyond where the SA-6 could effectively respond, to turn the air defense network's greatest strength, powerful radars, providing long-range detection, into its fatal vulnerability. Iraqi operators manning that SA-6 site received training in Soviet doctrine emphasizing ground-based air defense superiority, but doctrine couldn't overcome technological reality. Their radar designed to detect aircraft instead became a homing beacon, drawing missiles directly toward their position. The only way to survive was shutting down, which meant surrendering their mission to defend Iraqi airspace. Wild Weasel had inverted the tactical relationship completely. Soviet radars were supposed to control the battlefield by detecting aircraft. Instead, they became targets that could only survive by remaining silent and inactive. Soviet radars were designed to detect aircraft. Wild Weasels turned them into homing beacons.